Hello, come and join me while I try to make my first large-scale pot on the wheel. I'm very excited about this, seen many people do some amazing work, and so decided this week is the week to try it for myself. I'm going to start with 4 pounds to kind of set my base for the pot itself. I don't tend to throw more than 5 pounds at a time, and even that can be kind of challenging for me to center, so I'm kind of using the method where you center and start your piece with a smaller lump of clay, and then you can add coils to make the height that you're looking for to get that tall scale. And right away I can tell that I am not going to be as successful with centering this as I hoped, so it might take a few tries for me to pull this in and out, really feel it to get to that point. Alright, and now it feels pretty good, so I'm going to start opening this up. And instead of a normal pot, I'm going to pull it quite a bit wider, almost making a tray so that I can have that width that I need for this large pot. I'm keeping the thickness a lot thicker than I would normally do, just because you need a good stable base in order to hold all the weight of the clay that I'm about to add on top. I might be going a little thicker than I actually need to, but since this is my first attempt, I want to make sure that it is definitely not going to collapse from that issue at the very least. Here I realized I should have made my base lump a little bit wider and lower, so these sides might end up collapsing down a bit, but hopefully I can pull it out wide enough and compress that down so that it actually gets to where we need it to be. So here with the sponge, I'm just compressing the bottom of this, making sure that the clay is very sturdy and aligning really well so that we have a very strong base. I feel some sort of bubble potentially in there, so I'm just kind of feeling out to test where that might be. I don't actually end up feeling it with my fingers, so I'm just going to compress one more time, make sure that everything is good. So now that we have a sort of base shape on this guy, I'm going to turn my fan on and let this dry up just a little bit, just so it's not going to be too soft. And while I do that, I'm going to go and make my next layers. So instead of doing a true coil technique where it would be an extruded kind of cylinder shape, I don't have an extruder, so I used a slab roller, and I am just going to cut strips of this kind of thick slab so that I have even heights but can continue to build off of this in a consistent way. Alright, so I'm getting about 3 strips per slab. I'm going to wrap all my unused clay to make sure it doesn't dry up, and bring those strips that I just cut over to start the next stage. I'm not 100% sure if I need to do this since the clay is so wet, but I'm doing this first layer with scoring, basically just cutting slats into the edges of the clay to soften it and allow moisture to bind the two pieces together. So here I'm just going to score the next strip that's going to go on, and I'll start laying those together. While laying these pieces, I'm mindful of trying to keep the edge of the slab more inside of the pot, since it's much easier to push the clay out with the force of the rotations. You go a little bit in, and also that'll create a lip that I can then kind of push into the existing pot, just to kind of help make that first secure point before I start to try to pull this. And for these seams, I'm making sure that I am overlapping them and cutting them together at a slight angle so that they more easily stick together and actually line up together without any extra bulging of the clay. So now that my slabs are on, I am starting to push the edge of the clay down into the existing pot, just to make sure that I have that connection. Next is to hydrate this to make sure it's a little bit more flexible and to start getting that connection smooth and pulling that section as thin as I can while also keeping the thick walls to make sure it can be a nice and tall piece. Alright, so far so good. Seems pretty stable. I might make the walls a little too thin, but they're much thicker than what I usually work with, so hopefully still strong enough. And so I'm going to turn my fan on, cover up the rim to make sure that just the top ridge does not dry out, and then prep my next slices of slab so that I can do the next round in about a half hour. So now that it's been a little bit of time, I took the cover off the top and I'm going to do the same thing as I did before, adding on a layer of those slabs. Just get this a little bit taller. As I start to smooth this out and get it to a place I can start pulling that thinner, I'm starting to feel some of those seams that I had aren't quite as secure as I would hope, and definitely one just keeps splitting. So I'm going to try to keep salvaging that and see if I can get this to stick even though now it's pretty wet. As a way to kind of try to get this to work, I'm going to start pushing more and more down to compress that piece, and maybe it'll help to also stretch it to be long enough to where it won't keep ripping. But now that I'm adding that extra pressure, it's definitely collapsing because it was wider than the original foot, so it is starting to kind of bulge out and hit the base of that bat a little bit too much. And as I try to fix that issue, these sides start ripping open again and collapsing. And so it seems like my first attempt isn't going to get any farther than that. But this was really fun. I definitely see how I can do this, and I can't wait to try again to see if I can make myself some large size pottery plants for my backyard.